The silencer in Stillwater is how the game-winning shot for JV McCollum against Oklahoma State has been dubbed. A momentous shot, a signature play, a play that it's hard to describe just how meaningful that play is and how much it changes everything for this Oklahoma basketball team. Cullum hits a three at the buzzer in overtime to give OU an 84-82 win at Gallagher Ira Arena. We are going to talk about all of that and more on the latest episode of In the Paint, a basketball series fueled by OU Insider and the Rivals Network. I am Jesse Crittenden. I am joined as always by Brody Lusk. Brody, for one, is the silencer in Stillwater, is that an appropriate name for JV McCollum's shot? And two, what was your instant reaction watching that as that shot went up and then as it went in?
First of all, the silencer in Stillwater is the correct term for that shot. Second of all, my reaction was, and at the end of the regulation, they went to McCollum and he missed it. And then they go back to him at the end of overtime. And it was clearly like, the only way I could describe that play, I guess they just said, JV McCollum, ISO, go get a bucket. Because it didn't look like they had anything specific they were running. And, I saw the shot go up and I was like, there's no way. And then he hits it. And I was shocked. It's just one of those where I just haven't seen a shot go that way for Oklahoma in a very long time, because that felt like, for the past 2 years, that would be a game that they lose at the very end in overtime. And for McCollum to go in and hit that, you saw it with 4 minutes left in the game. I think McCollum hit his first three after going 0 for 7. And you could visibly tell that that shot, he was celebrating that shot. You could tell that he needed that shot to go in. So then he got the confidence and he comes in, and that was just, that's a dagger shot. Defender all over him. Nearly stepped out of bounds. I know some Oklahoma State fans have been whining about that, but you can clearly tell he wasn't out of bounds, but it was somewhat close. It was a crazy shot to hit. It wasn't like he was wide open. It was a crazy shot. So it was definitely huge, because we would be talking a whole lot different about this team if that shot had not gone in. So yeah, I think it's huge. The silencer in Stillwater, it's definitely a shot that I think a lot of Oklahoma fans and Oklahoma State fans are going to remember for a very long time.
I was in the building for that game, and it was more back and forth than I expected it to be. OU got down early, but there was a lot more scoring. For people who remember the game at Lloyd Noble Center a few weeks ago, that was a defensive rock fight the entire game. This was not that. Both teams were scoring pretty well, pretty efficiently. Brody, I got to tell you, it's one of those things, when it went to overtime, game keeps on going back and forth. OU actually held a lead for a lot of overtime, but OSU, I think it was John Michael Wright, hit a three to take that 1-point lead. That was a hell of a shot. It was an incredible shot.
Yeah.
In the corner. That was the shot we'd be talking about if JVN didn't hit that shot. But yeah, I think you have to give Oklahoma State credit, because on that shot, we were all sitting there thinking on press row. I think OU tried to, Porter's kind of explained it after the game, that they tried to do something, but OSU came out in a different defense than OU was expecting. And so I think you have to give Oklahoma State credit for kind of throwing OU off balance. And then, yeah, it quickly became, okay, JV McCollum's going to, the OU is going to win or lose this game on whether JVN can do something. Yeah. I got to tell you, man, I have never, in terms of what a shot means to a program, how much it changes, and also just the arena being stunned, just silence, completely stunned. I don't think I really appreciated exactly how crazy that moment was until I was leaving the game. I was like, holy cow. It's hard to overstate how meaningful that basket is, man. What are we talking about right now if that shot doesn't go in? What are we talking about?
We're talking about they're probably not making the NCAA tournament. Where do you go from here? You have, this week's obviously a tough week, and if they lost that game, the conversation would not be pretty. And the Doomers, they would be fully out and in effect. So I think that it's just huge. And it was Bedlam too, which obviously added a whole lot. And I wasn't there, but the crowd definitely looked like a pretty good crowd, considering Oklahoma State's record and considering, just all the things that went into that game. But It was huge. Like you really can't. There's really not words that describe how big that shot was for the Oklahoma State basketball program, and they haven't had a shot that meaningful anytime I've been watching Oklahoma basketball. So, and I haven't even, I think it was Mike Houck who tweeted about the buzzer beater. Like that was the first time he could remember a buzzer beater for a long time in Oklahoma Sooners basketball history. So it was huge.
I have to give a shout out to, you mentioned the crowd being there. The arena was rocking the entire game. It was an incredible atmosphere. I think it really gave OSU a boost, especially in the first half. But yeah, man, and I think actually one thing that hasn't been talked about enough, and I actually asked Javen about it after the game. I mean, he struggled to shoot the ball again for a lot of the game. He's had some struggles in conference play. I think he was 4-15 before that shot attempt. You mentioned he was 0-7 from 3 before that. But it wasn't just that play. That wasn't the only thing he did in overtime. I think he had 5 points in overtime. He had 2 boards. He had 2 assists. He was getting pulled defense for offense. So he didn't actually play the entire overtime. He came off the floor a couple of times. I was actually impressed that despite playing really rough all game, that he played a pretty big role in that overtime even before that shot. And I wonder if that's the kind of that shot and that overtime performance is that the catalyst for him to be a little bit better down the stretch.
Yeah, and Los too, because Los, I mean, he had in him and Oklahoma State, they were just trading. I think there was 2 or 3 back-to-back and 1 shots at the rim. And Los and Javian, that's kind of what you expected from them, where they're just they're going back and forth. You got one of them going to get a bucket and another one going to get a bucket. And to me, like Javian he's had a rough stretch. And I think, most players will go through stretches where they can't shoot the ball. But we've seen it with a lot of different players on Oklahoma's team this year. But the really good players, they'll go out and make big shots in overtime, even though they were 0 for 7. And Javian to go 0 for 7 and have the confidence that he had in overtime, it was clear. I mean, he thought he was going to score when he got the ball. So I think it's huge. And I think that definitely could be not just for McCollum, but for the rest of the team. That could be the confidence boost that they need, because we've seen, I mean, you want to get hot at the right time. And maybe that's where Otega Owe started to get it going in the second half. Rivaldo Soares has, like, he's up there. I would go to war with Rivaldo Soares. I mean, he came out, he played extremely well, and you're kind of seeing it start to come together. Jalen Moore's been consistently getting you 10, 12 points a game. And I think that shot could be the moment where we turn around and say, hey, that shot changed the direction of the season, because they got hot after that. McCollum and Los, they were firing on all cylinders after that. So it's huge. It's a confidence boost for everybody.
Let's talk about, you mentioned a couple of names there that I wanted to talk about in addition to Javian. And the first one, we got to talk about Rivaldo Soares. We just have to talk more about him, because obviously he got hurt against Baylor a week ago in the second half. He was by far the best player on the floor in that game for Oklahoma. Mm-hmm. Didn't play against Kansas. You saw how badly OU missed him on both ends, really, in that Kansas game. Coming into this Oklahoma State game, OU had no midweek game, so they had basically they had their bye week, and Porter Moser not only called him day to day, but I thought he let it slip a couple of times that it looked like Rivaldo wasn't going to play. And so I got to the arena on Saturday, and he's warming up just like he did against Kansas. He's warming up like an hour before the game. He's on the floor in uniform. But then he goes back and I'm like, okay, so let's see how he comes back out when OU comes for their pregame, their pregame layup line. He's dressed out. I'm like, holy cow, Rivaldo Soares is going to play. He's going to play. Now I'm thinking, okay, is he on minutes restriction? What's he going to look like? And he wasn't the first off the bench. He came in a little bit later than he normally does. Yeah. But then in late in the first half, it looked like he tweaked that ankle again.
Yep.
Came back out of the game. I thought he was done. I was like, okay, there's no way. There's no way he's coming back in. Nope. Like 2 minutes later, back in the game. And I mean, I think he finished with 20 points, game high, or a team high 20 points. I'll just say this, man. I think he played 29 minutes. I'm going to tell you this, man. OU doesn't win that game without Rivaldo Soares. No. I don't think they make it to overtime without Rivaldo Soares. He shot efficiently. He hit several huge threes. His defense, to me, outside of maybe Jalen Moore, it's not been close as to who OU's best player has been in conference play. And to me, that was the latest example of it. The grit, the determination, playing 30 minutes. He's their best player. He's their best player.
Yeah. And the broadcast mentioned this. That was the Kansas game was the first time in his career he hadn't played in a game. And so, I mean, it's the 20 points with a sprained ankle that he retweaked in the middle of the game. But the fact that he was 7 for 9 from the field and 3 for 3 from behind the arc, I mean, that's just incredibly impressive because anytime you shot the ball, you're thinking that's going in. And his defense was really good. And there's also just an aspect that doesn't show up on the stat sheet. When he plays, they have energy. He brings swag. He brings so much to the team. And, a lot of stuff that just doesn't show up on the stat sheet. So he's definitely been, their best player recently. And he showed up just huge in this game. Just for the fact that he got hurt, got re-aggravated the injury and came back out. I mean, that's just when he wants it as much as anyone. And for him to do that, because it definitely didn't sound like he was going to play, like you mentioned. It was huge. And that's the type of performance you look at and you go, I mean, that's a huge performance. That's got to be up there. To have a sprained ankle and do that, it was impressive.
He's averaging 10 points a game in conference play on nearly 60% shooting really efficiently from threes. Their second leading rebounder in conference play, almost 6 a game. And I actually don't think that really encompasses everything that Rivaldo Soares does for this team. I think the thing that really punctuated it also was he's been coming off the bench all year. Start the second half, it's him in that starting group, not Otega Owe, which that's another name we need to talk about. So Otega in that first half, I'll just tell you, and we talked about it a little bit before we started recording. I thought that first half was the worst Otega Owe has looked in an OU uniform. He was just bad. And he's always he's never been the best shooter, even when he shot really well in non-conference play. I think we all knew that wasn't going to last, especially from 3. But hustle plays, energy plays, blocks, steals, rebounds, that's where he makes his money. In that first half, he looked bad. I think he only had 2 points. He took a couple of really bad shots in that first half that directly led to OSU buckets. So to start the second half, it's Rivaldo Soares in the game. It's Otega Owe on the bench. And there was a part of me that was like, oh man, is Otega Owe going to play? And it's like, I mean, and if he plays, is it going to be like 5 minutes? What's that look like? Nope. Instead, he has his best half of maybe the entire season, at least in conference play. He had 14 in the second half. He had 14 in the second half, made some huge plays. He looked like he was shot out of a cannon. Just the energy that hasn't been there in weeks. He's there. He made some huge plays in overtime. I also don't think OU wins that game without the way he played in the second half and overtime. So I'm just curious. I mean, how much is it? Do you think is it just the coming off the bench woke him up? And if you're Porter Moser, is that a 1-game thing that happened in a must-win game, or with how well Rivaldo was playing and how well Otega seemed to play off the bench? Do you look at that a little bit more down the stretch?
I think you have to. And I don't know that he'll do that, but last year, Otega Owe was a spark off the bench for a lot of the games, and they ended up starting him because they had no other alternative. But he came off the bench and he had the energy that we saw him have last season and in non-conference play. And, 16 points, that's the first time he scored that many points since December 28th. And, there was still some moments where you're like, okay, that could be better. He got beat on a backdoor cut a couple times in the second half, but the offense was much better. And to me, I'm not worried about his defense. I think he'll figure that out. His offense, for him to go out there and have the confidence he had, and you mentioned he shot some bad shots in the second half. He ended up 8 for 10, from the field. So he was very efficient in the second half, and he was just getting good looks and he was making them. There's been times where he's got good looks, bunnies at the rim, and he just missed them. And then he was making them. So I think, benching him in that second half woke him up, and it kind of worked out best for all parties because Rivaldo Soares started that second half, and they started the half probably better than they've started any half this season almost. I mean, there's been a lot of times they've came out of that second half and it just looked dead, but it looked a lot better. So I think seeing the way they started that second half And seeing the way Otega Owe came off the bench and provided production, you have to consider it. I don't know that they'll do that just yet, but at the minimum, maybe he starts next game not playing that well, and you just go right back to the second half, and then maybe from there it's something you implement. But I definitely think it's a huge sign to see him get going the way he did in the second half.
To me, it's almost just it's just a little bit of a cleaner fit with
Mm-hmm.
Suarez with the starters instead of Otega. And it's not a knock on Otega, but Suarez is a knockdown shooter. He has been all year, especially in conference play. Um, he doesn't need the ball. He can do stuff with the ball, but he doesn't have to have the ball. And it just feels like Otega's strength when he's at his best is getting to the rim, but he's not a floor spacer, right?
Mm-mm.
He's not a screen setter. He's not doing a ton of stuff off ball. He's best with the ball in his hands, especially in transition, but he's best with the ball in his hands getting to the rim. So I do wonder if that's something that this coaching staff looks at moving forward. The other person I wanted to shout out was Luke Northweather, who
Yep.
was really good in limited minutes. He looked, I mean, against Kansas and Baylor, it was a little rough for him. Look, he's a redshirt freshman. The Big 12 is unforgiving.
Mm-hmm.
They've put a ton of pressure on him. But I thought against Oklahoma State, he was really good. I thought he had some really nice passes, a couple of big rebounds. That corner three he hit in the second half,
Huge.
huge. And it was big because I think it was big for his confidence. His shot
Mm-hmm.
didn't look particularly great either in that game or the last couple of games before that. That shot looked good. He took it in confidence and rhythm. And also he stopped catching the ball in the corner and taking one dribble and picking the ball up, which was like that's like me I'm screaming, stop doing stop
Yeah.
doing that. Stop dribbling and once and picking up the ball. It's the worst thing you could do. He just
Mm-hmm.
looked more confident. And that's great for a redshirt freshman, but it's big for Oklahoma because John Hughley is out. Porter Moser confirmed that. John Hughley is out, which you had reported that over at OU Insider. But John Hughley's out. They need Luke Northweather to
Yeah.
play 15 to 20 minutes moving forward. They need that.
Yeah, and he caught that ball in rhythm and shot it, and that's like, Northweather. Porter Moser came into the season saying he's the best 3-point shooter on that team. We've seen flashes of it the last time they played Oklahoma State and the time they played Kansas. And then you mentioned the past week, it was just not a good week for him. But that's probably his best, attribute. And to see him just catch it cleanly and hit it, big shot, it gave Oklahoma some momentum, a lot of momentum where you're going in like, okay, you got this now. And, I think that was huge. He had also, a couple nice rebounds. His defense wasn't bad at all. I mean, I kind of thought going into the game, maybe Brandon Garrison would give him some problems because he was given a little bit of problems at the beginning, but he stepped up and Northweather played well, and he had a nice block in the first half. So I think it was huge to get that, contribution from him because Sam Godwin, well, I thought he didn't play particularly bad in that game. You can't really expect him to play 25 minutes a game and have good production. And that's hard for really any big in the Big 12. So you mentioned that they need Northweather, and I think that it's just huge. It's a confidence boost. That's what it is. You're coming off a rough week, boom, and he had 5 points, same amount of points he had last time they played Oklahoma State. So it was huge, and that's you need scoring off the bench because Latrey Darthard, he didn't provide any. He didn't even shoot a ball. And Rivaldo Soares was good off the bench. Yeah, I thought it was huge. Another player who I thought played really well was Jalen Moore. In that first half, I mean, he was really the only reason they were within, 8 points at halftime. He had 11 points and he had 14 rebounds, which it's just huge to get that type of production from someone who's only 6'7". I've said it. I think Jalen Moore has a lot of the tools to go to the NBA, but that's a little bit far out. But yeah, I thought it was huge. He just remained consistent. And one thing I liked about this game, I don't know if you picked up on this, but I thought it was chippy. I mean, there was talking going on from the start. And to me, when it's a rivalry game, that's what I want to see. I want to see talking for both sides that didn't result in any technical fouls. So I thought that was also a very good aspect in this game.
No, it was. Look, it was just a great game all the way around. And this Oklahoma State team is not even the same team it was when they
No.
came to Lloyd Noble a few weeks ago. They have found something
Mhm.
I think if they had been playing like this and had done some of the stuff with their rotation all year, I think we'd be looking at them a little bit differently.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought it was just great. And I mean, they led for a lot of that game. I thought it was big for Oklahoma to stay within striking distance and eventually make some shots to eventually force overtime and get the win. I will say that one thing that as good as Oklahoma State's been playing, I mean, they won back-to-back games coming into that game. I will say that I do think OU's defense has fallen off a little bit the last few games. That was that was one of my takeaways from Stillwater was not only was Oklahoma State hitting shots, but a lot of their shots were easy. They were getting to the rim pretty easily. They were generating good looks. I think they shot nearly 70% in the second half. They made 4 of their 6 shots in overtime. I thought the defense looked bad against Baylor last week, or I guess a week and a half ago. I thought in the second half against Kansas, it looked bad. So, it's one of those things like, look, OU needs J.V. McCollum to hit shots. They need Otega away to play like he did in the second half. They need Jalen Moore to keep doing what he's doing. They need Rivaldo Suarez to keep doing what he's doing. But this team isn't going to make a run of any kind if the defense isn't consistent and solid. And so I don't know. Some of you have to give credit to Oklahoma State, but
Yeah.
when you're heading into a week like this and really this 4-game stretch to end the regular season, how concerned are you about OU's defense? Is that just, hey, you got to give hats off to Oklahoma State, or is it, no, we need to see that improve a little bit?
I think it's both because Oklahoma State made a lot of tough shots, and there was moments where Oklahoma played some solid defense. There was also just a lot of mistakes that you just haven't seen this team make. Even a couple games ago, they just weren't making those type of mistakes, and it just felt like they were allergic to a defensive stop down the stretch. Once they would get momentum offensively, they wouldn't have problem scoring, and then they just could not stop Oklahoma State. And granted, they made some tough shots. You mentioned the John Michael Wright 3. I mean, it wasn't bad defense there. That's just a good shot. But yes, there was a ton of moments, and it just kind of felt like throughout a portion of that second half where it's 1 step forward, 2 steps back, because you would score and then you couldn't get a stop. But I think, and again, I'll mention the shot again, the shot that JV McCollum hit, I think that it just changes the way their defense might play. I think, I don't know. It's just, when you look at it, it didn't really feel like they were giving 100% effort defensively. And there was players who were, there was just mistakes that you're like, what are you doing? So I think, the first time Oklahoma played Iowa State, their defense was really good. It was probably the main reason why they won that game. I'm very interested to see what that looks like coming off of a huge win, save the season win. I'm not too concerned about it, but there is a level of, if they play the type of defense they played at times in that game, they're definitely going 0-2 this week, and they're probably, only winning 1 or 2 more games. So it's probably the most interesting thing I'm interested to see in this next game on Wednesday night.
Let's talk just briefly about what this win means and what the landscape looks like for the next couple of weeks. The reason why, if anybody out there is at all thinking we're being over dramatic about that being a season saving win, we're not. Promise you that. Coming into that game, OU was 18-8. They were 6-7 in conference play. We've talked about this time and time again. A year ago, they finished with 15 wins, didn't make the tournament. 2 years ago, they finished the regular season with 18 wins, or they finished the end of the Big 12 tournament with 18 wins. They finished the regular season with 17 wins. They were among the first 4 out. Oklahoma was sitting at 18 wins heading into Saturday with games against number 8 Iowa State on this coming Tuesday, number 1 Houston on Saturday, then a manageable game against Cincinnati at home, and then at Texas. So if you're looking at what's the magic number for Oklahoma to concretely earn a tournament berth, it's probably 20. And based off the landscape of college basketball today and what's happened the last couple of years for OU, they probably need to hit 20 wins, either the end of the regular season or the end of the Big 12 tournament. They need to be sitting at 20 wins. If they lost that game, you're looking at, again, we talked about this last week. Okay, man, I'm not saying they can't win any of these games, but outside of Cincinnati, maybe. How are you feeling about any of these games? Now, all of a sudden, they get that win. They're at 19. They have at minimum 5 games to get 1 win.
Mm-hmm.
that's a really good place to be, especially considering how hard the schedule is. But having said all that, and there's a world where they've done enough now because
Mhm.
Joe Lenardi at ESPN released more bracketology stuff today. OU is still at an 8 seed, a solid 8 seed projected for the NCAA tournament. So I'm not saying they have to win one, but the magic number is probably 20. But they might have done enough to get a tournament berth with the win on Saturday. That's how big. And without that shot, we're thinking about what's Porter Moser's future, what's the future of some of the players on this
Yeah.
roster, all that kind of stuff. But so it's a huge win. It's a huge shot. Having said that, you probably still want to get another win to feel
Mhm.
really good about your chances. This week's going to be hard to do that, Brody. Again, number 8 Iowa State on Tuesday or on Wednesday. Sorry, I said Tuesday earlier. Number 8 Iowa State on Wednesday. Number 1 Houston on Saturday. Really tough week. Brody, they're probably not going to be favored in any of these games. I know Oklahoma beat Iowa State in Lloyd Noble a couple of months ago. This Iowa State team's a little bit different than they were then. They've been the second best team in the Big 12 this year.
And you're playing Hilton.
Yeah, absolutely. You're playing in Ames. It's okay if OU. I mean, it's not the end of the world if OU doesn't get a win this week. But if you're heading into this week, if you're Oklahoma, you're coming off a big win. What are you looking forward to from Wednesday and Saturday, particularly Wednesday? Is there anything you're focusing on? What's your mindset heading into a tough top 10 road opponent?
Look, I would say, if you could get a win, that'd be huge because you're playing with house money. Torvik has Oklahoma at a 93.2% chance to get in to the NCAA tournament. I would say the biggest thing you want to see improvement on would be defensively. If you go 0-2 this week, but you come out saying, hey, we played good defense, those teams were just simply better teams, I think you're feeling pretty good going into the next week. So, and again, things can get weird because, Kelvin Sampson, Quantus White, Hollis Price, they're returning to Norman on Saturday. You don't want to look ahead to that, but that's a game where I imagine the atmosphere would be pretty good. You can maybe make something happen. And then, last year they went down to Ames and won. Now, granted, Iowa State wasn't, as good as they are this year, and it took a Jacob Groves legacy game that I can't even believe happened. There's a chance you can win in Ames. Weirder things have happened, and I think nonetheless, you don't want to see a repeat of what happened in Waco. I think you want to see, just a hard fought game that you come away from saying, hey, looked pretty good. And so I'm looking for, maybe they can make things interesting down the stretch. But Iowa State, they're a great team, but Oklahoma did beat them the first time. So this is not a game that you're saying this is an unwinnable game. This is just a game where you're saying you'd have to play pretty well to win. So I think defense is the number one aspect that I'm looking at and saying, hey, if that improves, I think they won't have much trouble beating Cincinnati or at least winning one of those last 3 guaranteed games.
Another big week for Oklahoma coming up, but it feels a lot more manageable after what was arguably the signature win under Porter Moser. There's a couple of candidates, but in terms of what it means for the program, what it means for this season, hard to think of anything that rivals what happened on Saturday and what happened with JV McCollum's shot. But season's not over, and while things look good for them, a lot better than they look than if they had lost. Season's not over. Still ways to get better. Still ways for this team to improve its NCAA tournament resume. Hard to get a better opportunity than playing against 2 top 10 teams. They start that again on Wednesday, ESPN2 game, I believe. Is it ESPN2? Or on Wednesday?
Yeah.
I know it is Saturday. Is it ESPN? I should know that. I should have my notes prepared. Don't.
Yeah. Oh no, ESPN Plus.
ESPN Plus on Wednesday, ESPN2 on Saturday. I believe. So hard to have a better opportunity than playing 2 top 10 teams, including the number 1 team in the country. OU actually beat the number 1 team in the country, Alabama, last year, and Lloyd Noble. So it's not impossible, but a lot of things to break down. We're heading into absolutely the stretch run of the season. Brody and I will have you covered on all things OU basketball over at OUinsider.com and here on this YouTube channel. Make sure to like and subscribe. OU Insider YouTube channel. If you're not a VIP member over at OUinsider.com, now is as good a time as any with so much going around. Hey, OU women's basketball, 1 win away from clinching at least a share of the Big 12 championship, put in 2 wins away from claiming it outright. It's been a huge season for OU women's basketball. Softball starts at the Loves Field, the new stadium, this weekend. Lots of recruiting stuff going on. OU football, spring practices right around the corner. A lot of stuff you're not going to want to miss it over at OUinsider.com. But until then, we'll have you covered with OU men's basketball here on In the Paint over at OUinsider.com. Till then, we'll see you next time.